Okay, so it's time for the answers to our latest Q&A, and as promised, the patrons were guaranteed answers, so we'll do them first. Only 2 of them asked questions, and first was Vignesh Raman, who asks, what are your thoughts on the purity versus electability debate within the Libertarian Party? Phrased another way, are Gary Johnson and Bill Weld fit to be at the top of the Libertarian ticket? Really, I think this comes down to 2 things. What do you prioritize, and what do you think the role of the presidential candidate should be? So if you prioritize an absolutely pure libertarian message above all else, then I can certainly see why the Johnson-Weld ticket wouldn't be your cup of tea. But on the other hand, what good is a pure message if nobody hears it? Although some have doubted it, I think it's clear now, and it pretty much was before the convention too, that Johnson will be getting far more media exposure than any of the other candidates. But on yet a third hand, I'm quite the mutant, you know. There's no point in having a message widely heard that just isn't libertarian, so while there might be an argument for giving up some degree of purity, nominating a candidate who's more pragmatic and maybe isn't as boned up on libertarian theory as he should be, still, it just wasn't worth it to nominate Bob Barr. It's a bit like there was an equation, purity times exposure. A message that's only half as pure might be worth it if more than twice as many people heard it. The overall libertarianism of the country would go up. But you probably don't want to go too low on one or the other. Get people coming to the party, then it's up to us grassroots activists to educate them on all the details on what libertarian philosophy is all about, and I don't see how you can do that last part by whining, stamping your feet, and leaving the party. Okay, the second patron who asked a question was Anders, who asked simply, what is your favorite beer? Root. Specifically, IBC root beer. In the glass bottles. That's important. A&W is good too. Mug root beer, Bargs, they're okay, I'll drink them, but really, IBC for the win. Yeah, I'm a non-drinker if no one got the idea. Okay, so let's see what other people asked. So CinemaFan97 had 2 questions. The first one was, what do you think of Islam? And, well, it's a religion. I don't see how it's any better or worse than any other religion. I mean, people are talking about now about radical Islam, but I mean, I think it'd be quite easily shown that it's our foreign policy that's been radicalizing them. Amazing how you drop bombs on people and they end up not liking you. Yeah, like that's this weird, thing. Like, you can't prove that. Oh, come on, people. Yeah. But I mean, just, compared to Christianity in the Middle Ages, it's the same thing. There's nothing special about Islam that makes it particularly murderous or anything like that. It's just, that's what happens. And the second question was, are you a Zionist? And we had to have a little conversation about it because every time I'm asked this question, someone means a different thing by the word Zionist, and I've never really gotten the idea of what that word's supposed to mean. So I asked him to define it, and he said someone who supports Israel. But there's a difference between supporting the government of Israel, which I don't really support because I think they do a lot of bad things, and supporting the country as in the people, which, I think we should have friendly relations with all nations, and Israel should be no exception. So he rephrased, what are your thoughts on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And my thoughts are kind of like Grumpy Cat. I want both sides to lose, because neither one of them are being that great. In a way, I can sympathize with the Palestinians because they, or a lot of their parents, I mean, this was just in the 1950s. This wasn't that long ago. They were driven from their homes. That Palestinian exodus made the Trail of Tears look like a conga line. So, I mean, I can really get, why they're not that happy. So, I mean, it's just like what happened on this continent with the Native Americans. The army kept waging war against them, and so they kept attacking the pale faces, and I mean, they didn't make any distinction between people who were in the army and people who were settlers. It's all the same thing to them. And that, I think, is the big mistake, equating the people of a country with their government. You want to fight the government, but don't fight the people. They might be victims just as much as you are. But, it's a little difficult for me to get indignant about Palestinians and other Muslims doing that. When you have Israelis doing that, and you even have Americans doing that, talk about carpet bombing all these Islamic countries. Yeah. If we were to do any proper, objective definition of a terrorist state, how would America not qualify? Really? All right, Killer 14B, I think his was the most highly rated. He asked, do you think we'll achieve Alcubierre Drive and wormholes in the not-too-distant future? And the answer is, of course, I have no idea. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't really want to discount human ingenuity. I don't want to be like Julius Sextus Frontinus, who said in the 1st century that everything that can be invented has been invented and there's no hope for future development. Well, you don't want to be that guy. But at the same time, we're not really talking about something that's so much of an engineering feat, not like breaking the sound barrier. Breaking the light barrier, that's some pretty serious physics there. And maybe the physics of this universe allows for it, and maybe there's a way we can achieve it, but in all honesty, I probably wouldn't put any money on it. I'm absolutely delighted if it happened, but not really anything I would bank on. Do you agree with improving human nature by genetically engineering people? Legally, yes. You have the freedom to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't harm anyone else. And I certainly wouldn't want to ban it, because how do you draw the line between improving human nature by genetically engineering people and curing people of genetic diseases? I mean, I don't really see a demarcation line. Okay, here's a genetic disease, so we'll give someone this genetically engineered retrovirus that can go into the cells and give them the genes they need to fix it. But then, where do you draw the line between that and, say, like making someone stronger? I don't really see any kind of place where you draw the line there. Now, morally, of course, I think there are ethical issues. And, of course, if you watch the movie Gattaca, that's where you don't want to go with that. But for the most part, I don't want to stick out my foot and trip up people who are trying to improve the progress of all mankind. So. All right, Ali Adib asks, how might frequencies and or air travel routes be distributed in a free market? Well, I think they'd be done by homesteading. So, like, if you set up a transmitter and start broadcasting on a frequency over an area and that's been unclaimed, then you can have a claim to that. And so it's like you're homesteading those frequencies over that area. Same with air travel. You might have a couple of airports, like Charlotte and LaGuardia, say, and they work out this air travel route between them. And as long as no one else is using that route, you could say they've homesteaded it, and anyone else who wants to fly within that route has to work with them to do that. And you might think that sounds a bit complex. And it probably was back when all this was getting set up, but nowadays we have the technology, I think, to manage that very efficiently. So I don't think it would be an issue. Okay, the Gnarly Doug has kind of a long one. I believe with the internet and cheap widespread communications, file sharing, 3D printing, cryptocurrencies, open source software, Kickstarter, and similar technological and social innovations, that we are moving toward a future where our core economic structures and industry are far more decentralized and readily available. I think this is akin and as momentous as when hunter-gathering gave way to agriculture and agriculture gave way to industry. It's interesting. I've gotten into the books by L. Neil Smith, and earlier this year I read Pallas. That's Pallas. That's a great book about terraforming and colonizing the asteroid Pallas. And it's based on an article, and I'll have to see if I can dig up this link, but this guy's making the argument that the agricultural revolution wasn't really such a great thing after all, and we might have had even better progress without it. And in this novel, Smith kind of took that idea and ran with it. Now, I have no idea if that's true or not, but, it's worth considering. I think it's always good to kind of go back and question all the things that we think we know. So I'll see if I can grab a link to that. But anyway, he says, now industry is giving way because it is becoming something only a small percent of the population will need to do, or anyone can do most of it on an on-demand basis. I'm not really sure, though, that 3D printing is ever going to take the place of mass production just because of how efficient mass production is. Although I do think it's definitely going to change the landscape. Like, a couple of years ago, the door handle on my car broke, and it's just this piece of plastic, and yet, to get that piece of plastic, just the part cost $150 for this tiny little piece of plastic. And I was talking with a guy about it, and he said, yeah, we're thinking of saving up for a 3D printer so that we can just print parts like that and do it a lot more cheaply instead of having to pay out the wazoo for them. So I guess if you need things that are for an older car that aren't really being mass-produced anymore, it might be more efficient and might even upset the market, like if there's only one supplier of that and so they just jack the price way up sky high. Well, hey, there's always 3D printing. That's always going to compete with that. So I think it'll play a role, and I think it'll have a big effect, but I don't know if it's ever going to completely take the place of mass production, unless you're talking about things like space where resources are very limited. Like if you imagine you've got a moon colony going on, people are drinking out of plastic cups. or whatever, you just 3D print the plastic cups or whatever they need, and then when you're done, you just chuck them in the recycler, and then you reclaim the plastic and use them to make whatever else you need. So that might be good. You need something where you can't really ship it from Earth because it's really, really expensive, but anyway. I think our current political forms, nation states, will be forced to adapt to something else as the economic forms change. Though I think we might still call the new political entities by the same names, they could be fundamentally different, just as we still have a Britain, but it's no longer a true monarchy like it was, say, in the 1400s. What are your thoughts on this? And if you think I'm correct that the political structures will fundamentally change, what are your thoughts on what the new dominant political structure will be as this Diamond Age economy evolves into dominance? Well, governments only change kicking and screaming. And I think what you're seeing now with information is what you're going to end up seeing with 3D printed products. People are going to be whining about how people can print their own door handles for their cars and not having to pay them $150 to supply them, Because people are like, they can download my movie for free. Well, that's a good thing. It gets your name out there. It gets you more exposure. How many studies do we need to do to show what a benefit that is and debunking all of the crap they spew about, poor artists, and then they sue and they get all this money and none of it actually goes to the artist. Yes. I think we'll see that same kind of thing, but that's death throes. That's kicking and screaming. I think the only question is, are we going to dismantle it ourselves, or are we going to just dig in our heels, try to keep things the way they are, and just have the collapse? Because the collapse would be the bad thing. All right, TG Gecko writes, my question is on consumer safety. Take the simple case of lead paint in toys. I understand that there's a strong free market force to eliminate harmful products from the market, but is this force fast enough or effective enough compared to the force of law? Geez, have you seen how slowly the law operates? There was this, I think it was back in the 90s, this thing about Denny's, and I think it was only like a couple of locations, but black people were claiming that they weren't getting service and they were kind of being shoved on the back of the line or whatever. Not literally, but they'd seat them, but then they'd just take forever to serve them or whatever. And so they were saying it was racist, and I don't know if it was or not, but what I do know is that the lawsuits around that took years. It didn't take like a month, if that, for Denny's, the corporate entity, to come out and say, okay, stores, you're not allowed to do that, and we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's how quickly it happens. And then there was that case, we talked about it on the podcast, the two lesbians shared a kiss at a ball game, I forget which stadium it was, and the security guard stopped them and said, no, I'm going to throw you out because we don't do grab ass here. Well, they weren't grabbing asses, they were kissing. And so it was like 2 weeks later, they were sitting across a table from the owners of the stadium who were saying, what's a good way we can prevent this from happening? So, it's far faster and far more effective than the force of law every single time. So, all right, so he says, take the extreme ideal case in which we have a bad actor and an effective screening program. It seems as though the consumers will only learn to avoid the product after the information has been properly spread, at which point many may have suffered. A bad actor may change brands to avoid consumer recognition. While the law may be able to punish him directly, is the free market solution always better than the force of law in such cases? Well, just look at UL, Underwriters Laboratories. Manufacturers want that UL label on the product, or there are others like MetLabs. I'm kind of using UL not really to promote the company itself, but just as the concept, but there are just dozens of them that do this. But the manufacturers want that label that says that UL themselves have examined the product, tested it, it's safe. And the reason why is because when they go selling that product at Walmart, Walmart's going to want to see that. Walmart doesn't want to put dangerous products on their shelves. At the very least, they don't want to have to get the money back when it's returned. And if a product gets returned a lot, Walmart will yank it. And also just the fact that killing your customers is bad for business. A dead customer doesn't come and give you money anymore. And that's without looking at whatever tort solutions might be there. Oh, you sold a dangerous product, so we'll take you to court. That plays a role too. But the point is, if you've ever seen the process of actually getting a product sold at Walmart, it's incredibly competitive. Everyone wants their product on those shelves. And so Walmart can be very selective about that, and they are. They really want the best quality for the lowest price. It's a complete myth that the stuff Walmart sells is crap. No, it's every bit as good as anything you could buy anywhere else because they have those exacting standards because there are just so many more businesses who want to put their products on the Walmart shelves than Walmart has shelf space for. And of course, there are a lot of people who shop at Walmart, so yeah, I mean, that's how it works. And that's always going to be far better and far more efficient than going to the government to do it. Because the free market, Walmart and people like that, they have an incentive to care about you. Like I said, it affects their bottom line. Government doesn't. Government only cares about their power and power for their cronies. That's why they advocate things like gun control and minimum wage and stuff like that. None of those things are going to help you. None of them. That's just what they can do to kind of puff up their chests and virtue signal and stuff like that. See how compassionate we are. We're doing this for you. No, they're not. Okay, Jordan Colburn asks, who do you think was the least worst U.S. president? Really kind of hard to say, but I'm kind of tempted to say Grover Cleveland. Because even though he wasn't able to achieve all that much, I think he did as much as he could. And after getting drummed out of office, he got elected 4 years later, making him the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, which I think speaks to how the people, once he was out, was like, whoa, wait a minute, we want this guy back. So, 2, what would people be very surprised to know about you? You know, I think you guys pretty much already know everything. I'm not really all that private, I don't know, it's kind of hard to think of something. 3, if you were forced to vote for one of the 3 stooges, Trump, Clinton, and Sanders, which one would you pick? All right, so normally this is the kind of question I reject, and I usually use to say, oh, if I point a gun to your head and make you pick one, who would you pick? And I just say, pull the trigger. But you know what? In this case, I'm going to answer it because it lets me point something out, and I'm going to probably surprise everyone with this answer, but I think I'd pick Bernie Sanders. Now, yes, Bernie Sanders is a complete idiot when it comes to economics. But on everything else, he's actually kind of good. He's good on foreign policy. He's good on ending the war on drugs. He wants marijuana legalized and stuff like that. So, that puts him far ahead of Trump and Clinton, who were just as bad on economics, as far as I can tell, although in different ways. And even on the economics thing, as far as I can tell, Sanders economically has the same goals as libertarians. It's just that libertarians understand economics and understand the best way to go there, and Sanders is kind of taking a kindergarten understanding of everything in his approach to it, but that is not the kind of thing that Trump and Clinton want. So, and I did take the questionnaire at isidewith.com after Gary Johnson was nominated, and my top pick, of course, was Gary Johnson. Second place was Jill Stein of the Green Party, and third place was Bernie Sanders. And then after that, Clinton, and then soon after that, Trump at the bottom. So, I think that really says something where you've got these marginalized ideologies that are just on the surface so different from each other. But when you compare it to what the establishment is doing, I think that when you look at Sanders and Jill Stein and Gary Johnson and other libertarians and even other Greens, I think that is more like what the cross-section of the actual U.S. population is than Trump and Clinton and Rubio and Cruz and people like that. So I really think, and I've said this the last several elections, I'd love to see the election be between the Libertarian and Green candidate than between the Democrat and Republican. I think that'd be better for everybody. Ara Magoo asks, do you believe the public's perception of science is improving? I think so. Just look at popular culture. It used to be the scientist was the crazy guy in the basement who came up with the formula, or he created this virus that got out and turned people into zombies. You even see it with kind of the lamer movies like Jurassic World. Hey, let's genetically engineer a huge dinosaur and hope that nothing goes wrong. No, that's not how they operate. But I think if you look at the bulk of it, and if you look at shows like The Mentalist, and technically he wasn't a scientist, but he was kind of the rational skeptic, you've really got positive portrayals of that in the media in a way that I don't think you have before. And really, science is being portrayed more and more in a positive light, I think, than it has been in the past. Alright, so Helicopter Pilot asks a question which he says his main question is in bold, but as you see, YouTube isn't bolding anything, and that's the problem I've been having. Hey, Shane, why don't you use bold instead of all caps? Well, because it doesn't seem to want to let me. But anyway, I think his main question is, what do you think about the movement many libertarians have made to supporting immigration restriction due to the tendency of certain groups of people to be disproportionately in favor of the status policies we wish to end? In other words, And this has been what Stefan Molyneux has been saying. We need to stop immigrants from coming in, because if we let them in, they'll vote for statist policies and we'll have socialism. First of all, I'm not sure that's true. Immigrants tend to be far more entrepreneurial than the rest of the population. I mean, just look, especially, at all the tech companies that have been started by immigrants. And that was kind of always the case. Nikola Tesla, Alexander Graham Bell, these guys were immigrants. So that's nothing new. But I also think it's like, oh, well, they're coming from socialist countries. That means they are going to vote for socialism. Well, I'm not sure people leave a country because they like the way things are being done there. I mean, I think people from Venezuela are going to come in and say, hey, look, people, look at what we've just gone through. You really don't want socialism. I think that's far more likely. But in either event, it's still no justification for pointing guns at people because they tried to commit the heinous crime of crossing an invisible line on a map. And as Milton Friedman has pointed out, countries have always been better off with more free trade and more free immigration. And he also points out, for these libertarians, immigration restriction is not a permanent good, but instead a means of temporarily fixing the scales of politics, blah, blah, blah. But when has government ever done anything temporarily? We're still paying the Spanish-American War tax. And that was over 120 years ago, something like that. And we're still paying it. We're still having income taxes withheld from our paychecks. Because that, actually, ironically, it was Milton Friedman who suggested that during World War II, and that was as an alternative to money printing and deficit spending so the government could go ahead and get the money and put it to use in the war. And they promised that it would go away as soon as there was peace and that we'd be back to normal and there'd be no income tax withholding. Well, there was peace. There's been peace, but we still have income tax withholding. Nothing is done temporarily in government. Nothing. And then Bob Durantz asks, if Billy has 6 apples and Susie has 5 apples, why don't they just shut up and eat? Someone else who hates word problems as much as I do. Yeah, there was an episode of Our Gang, the Little Rascals is what they renamed it to. I think it was Spanky. You had their teacher. I don't remember the teacher's name. I think it was Mrs. Crabtree or something like that. But anyway, she was trying to get him to do some math, and she said, if a chicken laid 2 eggs here, and I laid 3 here, and he just laughed and said, I don't think you can do it. So, yeah, I posted one to Facebook a few years ago. I don't remember exactly how it went, but my daughter had one that we were just kind of scratching our heads over. So basically the idea was that a guy had 3-foot-long boards, and he needed 2-foot-long boards. So after cutting the 2-foot-long boards, how many boards does he have? Well, it was kind of implied that how many 2-foot-long boards does he have, because that's what he needs. And of course he has 4. But it also could have been how many boards does he have all total, which is 8, because he's got the 1-foot boards that are left over. And we were kind of scratching our head trying to figure out which one was. So we ended up just going with 4. Turns out both of those were wrong. The answer is 6. 6? How is 6 the answer? Well, because you've got 4 boards. 3 times 4 is 12. And then you cut them up into 2-foot boards. And so that's 6 2-foot boards. What? No, it doesn't work that way, people. Not unless you've got some kind of magic epoxy that can stick the 1-foot boards together and make them 1 2-foot board. I don't think so. And the whole point of word problems is to say, oh, well, this is a realistic application of math to show you how you can use it in day-to-day life. They aren't. They just aren't. Come up with some actual examples, people. This is like I've been saying. I reiterated it on the latest podcast. The best thing to do is teach people to code, because then you are teaching them how to solve everyday problems. And you're teaching them in a way that will let them solve whatever problems show up, not just the particular ones you're teaching them, and just use that to replace the entire math curriculum. That would be so much of a better way to do it than this 19th century Prussian model. All right, so that looks like it, at least of all the ones people have uprated that I kind of thought were worth talking about. Thanks very much to everyone who submitted questions. And again, as always, thanks very much to the patrons who support this channel. You're really, really helping me keep going with this, because I won't lie, some weeks it's kind of like, oh, why do I do this? Why do I put all this work into this and keep going? And the patronage really, really helps with that. And so do the comments, and so does the encouragement and things like that. It's all good. So thank you very much, everybody. Until next time, stay strong and be free.